Hi everyone, and welcome to the Pest Control Officer webinar of 2025. My name is Betty Johnson, the Plant Health Technical Advisor for SARM Division 3. I will be the moderator for this webinar. A few housekeeping rules for this webinar before we get started. All attendees will be muted for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions, please type them into the question box, which will be on your right-hand side of the screen. We will have a question and answer section after the end of the presentation. This webinar is eligible for continuing education credits for pesticide applicators. If there is more than one person watching from the same computer that wants a continuing education credit for this webinar, please let me know. My contact information is located within the chat box and on the SAM website as well. This webinar will be recorded and will be posted on the SARM website within the next couple of weeks. Today's presentation is about the integrated pest management for rodent control, major issues with small animals, burrowing rodents, mice, and rats, with discussions that cover biology, damage, hazards, and means to control them. This webinar will be presented by Dr. James Dancy, the Provincial Insect and Vertebrate Pest Management Specialist with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture. On that note, let's get started. Welcome, James. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for your time and attention in advance. I'll maybe get rolling on this. So we'll be talking about integrated pest management, burrowing rodents, mice, and rats. Not necessarily in that order. We're going to talk a little bit about the biology of these critters and some of the species diversity and some of the control strategies associated with these, and take a bit of a deep dive into some of these modes of action, so you get a better understanding of some of what's happening, metabolically and chemically with the application of some of these products. So with that, oh, pardon me. Let me know if my slide didn't advance. Should be good. Okay, anyway, so just a brief discussion of integrated pest management. This is a relatively recently coined term, and for you history buffs, the first notable politician to use the term was actually Richard Nixon. I don't know if he necessarily had his fingers thrust in the air while he said it or not, but he was the first notable politician to use the term. So it is the integration of chemical, biological, and cultural control methods. Of course, the 20th century saw a real uptick in the use of synthetic pest control products, and as a means to try to reduce our reliance on some of these, the integration of biological and cultural control methods were incorporated into this general practice of integrated pest management. So it isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It really is very much a case-by-case approach. So once again, first used in the 70s in response to negative effects of pesticide overuse, and the interesting thing about it is when these methods are combined, you can actually wind up with a synergistic effect on control. So that is when, the difference between additive effects and synergistic effects. Additive, pretty self-explanatory, 1 + 1, 1 + 1 = 2. Synergistic effects, think 1 + 1 = 3. You can sometimes get some pleasant interactions with these different factors. So the first thing we're going to talk about are burrowing rodents, or the first group. And of course, primary in Saskatchewan and across the prairies, or at least the southern portion of the prairies, is Richardson's ground squirrel, which will be abbreviated as RGS in some following slides. You've probably encountered these ones. I'd ask for a show of hands, but I can't see any of you. So yeah, very, very common animal on the shortgrass prairie. It's native to this part of the world. It is native and ubiquitous, and as many of you are probably familiar, it was a regulated pest until relatively recently. Not really the best fit for a regulated pest. Typically a regulated pest is going to be one where you have some hope of containment, control, or eradication, and that is, long-term suppression of populations. Because this animal is native and ubiquitous, it was, we'll say, demoted to a nuisance pest. The minister still has the option to act on populations and issue orders based on those populations, so there is still legal recourse for control, but it is not a blanket regulated pest at this time. So once again, native to Western North American shortgrass prairie, also called the Dak rat or Dakota rat, or flicker tail. They are generalists, so that is, they will feed on a broad assortment of plants, seeds, nuts, insects, and I'm sure many of you have probably experienced them cannibalizing on each other. So they will feast on each other's young on occasion, and certainly have no problems with munching on cadavers on the side of the road. So this past year, we saw significant damage in western, central, and southern Saskatchewan. This is a shot that I got from, it's about 40 minutes south of Swift Current. Two things to note in this picture is A, the extent of the damage. So this was second seeding. This is canola, you can probably tell. So the first seeding was all but consumed. The second seeding, you can see it's a bit of a mixed bag of plants at different development stages. Also note too, the cereal crop right next to it is virtually untouched. So they really demonstrated a predilection for canola, in this case for seedling canola. Another thing to notice, in addition to the the severity of the damage, is just how far in the field they got. And this was new for me. I hadn't seen them get that far into a field in the past, and this was, I don't want to say a common occurrence, but it certainly wasn't the only place I saw this. So this is a grower who put down considerable amounts of money, somewhere north of about $30,000 in Richardson's ground squirrel control. I suspect he got it down a little bit late, and we'll talk about that. Timing is everything for control. So little discussion about Richardson's ground squirrel life history. When they emerge in the spring, we've got one generation per year, so that is 1 litter per year. The spring emergence is going to start with the adult males, and it's correlated with warming surface and air temperature. So typically when ambient temperatures are regularly staying above freezing and the soil temperature rises to about the freezing mark. Once again, males are going to appear about 2 weeks before females, and they could start appearing almost any day. It's a little bit cold for them, but last winter, at least in the south of the province, they were happily scurrying across snowbanks. So yeah, they could start to appear relatively quickly. Males are going to appear about 2 weeks before females, and they're going to engage in what's called testicular recrudescence. And the literal translation of recrudescence is the return of something horrible. So their horrible testicles return. So they quite literally grow a pair in the spring, and of course that's going to increase their testosterone levels, and they're going to engage in fighting, or RGS UFC if you prefer. If you happen to have a lawn chair and some tasty beverages, sit in an area with Richardson's ground squirrel and watch the fights. They really go at it enthusiastically. So females terminate torpor the day before they appear. Once again, that's going to be about 2 weeks after males appear. Torpor is the state that they engage in to hibernate, and we'll talk a little bit about that in an upcoming slide. So the young, I did mention before, 1 generation per year, 1 litter per year, full stop. They never engage in 2 litters per year. It may seem like it in some regions. The reason that males are fighting as enthusiastically as they are is to gain access to females. Females are receptive for 4 hours per year. So that's not 4 hours per day for several days. That's 4 hours full stop per year. If she misses the boat, then that's it till next year. If the males miss the opportunity to mate with that female, that's it for them for the year. So yeah, they're pretty enthusiastic about accessing females for that 4 hours. They do produce 1 litter per year, as I indicated, typically 5 to 8. I have seen litters of 10, although that's relatively uncommon. Gestation lasts about 23 days, lactation about 5 weeks. And lactation is going to occur entirely underground. So when those babies are coming up, typically in late May, can be as late as early June, they are weaned and they are ready to go. So they are, they may be maybe not the brightest little critters in the whole wide world, but they are functionally independent of mom. They still rely on her for training, but they don't necessarily need her for survival strictly. They're going to stick around within her territory. Richardson's ground squirrel is very territorial. So it is, as indicated on the previous slide, is semi-social and semi-fossorial. So what that means, being semi-social, they are fiercely territorial, but they will stick in close proximity with each other as female kin groups. So it's going to be mothers, grandmothers, related, and sisters, maybe cousins. And they're going to keep some of their progeny close, primarily females. They tend to drive their sons away pretty quickly, though. So that their society is based entirely on female kin groups, and males are like little furry ships that pass in the night. So they're going to be on the periphery of those territories, trying to gain access to the females when they're receptive, and kind of having little battle royales the whole time. But they are functionally peripheral to that society. So once again, the young are going to stay within the mother's territory. They can claim it as part of their own. It depends a lot on resource abundance. If resources are short, then daughters tend to get driven away as well. The females tend to move shorter distances from the initial colony than males do. Males can actually be driven many kilometers away, and typically, if you're experiencing that familiar tup tup sound on a gravel road, that's probably going to be a male looking for a new colony. So once again, they can move long distances, particularly if populations are high. So what this means, and this, I'll illustrate a couple of things on this slide. I did indicate that males come up a couple of weeks earlier than females. That's the adults. Juvenile males are going to come up later, and this is going to be associated with the birth of these animals and with the overwintering juveniles. Although many overwintering juveniles will be ready to go for mating in the spring as well. But you can notice that they're only up above the ground for a limited period of time, typically 100 days a year. This overlap of different generations and different genders, different sexes, that gives the appearance of the overall population being stretched out over many months. And you can see the juvenile males, they can be active right up until, they were active on my place till mid-November this year. The best time to control these animals is either with poison or with firearms, in this case a blunderbuss. If you happen to have a blunderbuss, good on you. Is late February to early May. You want to get them before the babies come up, and you want to target the adult females. And that's the best time to do it. Once those babies come up, you're looking at a quintupling or a factor of 8 increase in that population. And a lot of guys got themselves in trouble this past year with that. So looking at moderate populations, and then with particular the canola crop, with the cool, wet conditions and slow stand establishment, and them still being those crops still being in a seedling stage, when the gopher babies come up, really caused a lot of damage. So there were several factors that contributed to damaging canola crops this year. So there are some close relatives, and these the animals that I'll talk about in the next few slides are all registered with the control products. Be sure to check the label. Each of the labels is going to indicate specific species that these products are registered to control. If you're targeting a species that isn't labeled, that is actually an off-label use and a violation of the Pest Control Products Act. So be aware. Franklin's ground squirrel is a close relative. It's actually in the same genus as Richardson's ground squirrel, and it's larger. You can tell the gray coloration here, moderately larger. Rarely or infrequently. It's funny, I just noticed the garter snake in this picture. I'd never noticed that before. I presented this several times. Anyway, the Richardson or the Franklin's ground squirrel, a little bit larger. Typically, you're going to see these things, or where I've seen these things numerous, is on the edges of grasslands where they meet up with shelter belts or with forest. and they can be common. I haven't seen an economically damaging population of Franklin's ground squirrel. The only place I've seen them as a problem it was in a church graveyard, and that was again in an area where that grassland was abutting up to a forest. The next one is 13-line ground squirrel. These ones are not colonial. They're actually solitary. They will gather is a strong word, but you can find them together-ish. They're not terribly tolerant of each other, but if soil conditions are appropriate and there's enough resources to go around, then you can find them sharing space. But they are very territorial, so they're not colonial. Oh, I should mention as well, and it was a point I wanted to illustrate in a previous slide. The colonial structure of Richardson's ground squirrel is such, and I did indicate they are fiercely territorial. So that female is going to have a burrow system. It's not just going to be one hole in the ground. Her burrow is going to be about 30 feet across, and she's really reluctant to share that. There will be multiple entrances. There will be a feeding chamber. There will be caches for her to store food, sleeping chamber, latrine, and they are constantly making changes to their burrow systems. So be aware when it comes time to control these animals, you don't have to hit every hole. So if you've got a 30-foot wide burrow system that one ground squirrel is occupying, and you find a hole with some activity, target that one. You may be able to limit your efforts a fair bit. So sorry, back to 13-line ground squirrel. Very conspicuous markings on these ones. Typically not problematic, although they can be in gardens. They will conduct little raids into gardens, but typically not nearly as damaging as Richardson's ground squirrel. So keep that in mind when time to control comes. Evaluate the damage and make your assessment based on that. Uh, Northern pocket gopher is a distant relative of these animals. It is still a rodent. It is colloquially called a mole in Western Canada. It is not a mole. It is a gopher. It is the northern pocket gopher. Curiously enough, all the animals we call gophers are actually ground squirrels. So yeah, this one gets called a mole. It is not a mole. We don't have moles here. Moles are little insectivorous animals, and only very distantly related to these in that they are still vertebrates. Superficially, look similar-ish. These ones, the northern pocket gopher has very distinct burrows, and you'll notice these burrows. These are basically tips from their burrows. So they're taking material out of their burrow system and just dropping it on the ground there. So there won't be an entrance associated with this. There will be small feeding holes, and what you want to look for for control of these ones is the main tunnel. And another consideration for these ones as well is that they're also solitary. They're active all year. They're spending most of that time underground, feeding on roots, but they will venture to the surface occasionally through those little feeding holes. And you won't see any material around the feeding holes. They're just kind of naked holes on the ground that are about this, a little bit bigger than a toonie, about the size of a silver dollar, maybe a little bit bigger than that. But these tips for control, look for these. And a really effective way to control these is with a steel, or to detect them, the main tunnel, is to prod with a steel probe when you feel a soft spot, and it'll typically be about 2 feet away from one of these main tips. And you can insert a trap or insert poison bait into that. Traps are very effective for these animals. Arguably as effective or more effective than poison baits. And once again, they are solitary. So you may see a lot of damage in an area, or perceived damage with these mounds can be associated with a small number of these animals. So your effort towards control can be limited and still get good results. So populations of Richardson's ground squirrel, back to Richardson's ground squirrel, they tend to increase during extended periods of warm and dry weather, and that comes with an asterisk, because we certainly did not see that this spring. I think the damage that we saw was really an artifact of that slow stand establishment, particularly in canola, and the animals getting a real foothold in those fields. So the claims data and the indemnity paid by SCIC was actually lower this year, and by about half than it was before strychnine was deregistered. So if that's an indication of the population, um, relatively lower. So yeah, however, this cool wet spring didn't knock them back nearly as much as many expected. So one thing to keep an eye out for, and one thing that we're continuing to look at, is gathering data on these to get a better understanding. So there is a nominal threshold. So it's an action threshold, and this is where you need to act. So yeah, I think appropriately called an action threshold. Sometimes action thresholds are called the economic threshold, and sometimes that's confused with the economic injury level. So the economic injury level is the population level where your cost of control equals your damage. You want to avoid that. So because you can exceed that, and if the damage exceeds exceeds the benefit, then you've really missed the boat on controlling. So the action threshold, which is nominal, so it's a best guess action threshold, and that's where you want to act, so you don't achieve that economic injury level. And keep in mind, this is nominal. One active mount per 4 strides, or 20% crop damage over 100 meters. And I think if you've got 20% crop damage over 100 meters, you got to act. So I think that's a pretty good case by case assessment of an action threshold. So as far as control goes, there are several control strategies. And once again, these should be integrated into an integrated pest management strategy. And these are case by case, site by site. So evaluate what's happening with predators in the region. You can see a significant impact from badgers. They can reduce a ground squirrel colony by 60% or more. They do cause damage on their own, but their damage can be repaired as well, and they can have a pretty significant and long-lasting impact on a gopher colony. So tolerance and promotion of predators. These are some photos that with the exception of the hawk, that actually came from my place. So we had badgers well established, and they really did a number on the gopher colony there, as well as short-tailed weasel. And this one was actually stealing gopher babies as they were nursing. So caused quite a kerfuffle in the colony, but this one managed to get away with several babies. Shooting can help, trapping can help, drowning can help, but as can maintain a vegetative height more than 15 centimeters. They like to see the world around them, so they can see things like hawks coming, and they tend to get a little uncomfortable with tall vegetation. Any of these, including chemical control, is not a panacea. So that is, none of these are perfect solutions, and achieving eradication will be virtually, we'll say, very difficult with any of these techniques. Alone, together, yeah, you can have a pretty significant suppressing impact on these populations. Several products registered for the control of Richardson's ground squirrel, and these include products with the active ingredient chlorofazanone, which is an anticoagulant, difazanone, which is another anticoagulant, aluminum phosphide in several registered forms. The one I've listed here is gas toxin. The aluminum phosphide is primarily used for the fumigation of grain bins, but it is also registered for use on burrowing rodent mounds. And once again, be sure to check your species list on the label. Zinc phosphide is also used, and this is a ready-to-use formulations. So that is open the bag, fire a spoon in, down the hole it goes, and they munch on the bait and get a dose of phosphine gas. There's also white mustard seed powder plus soap, and we'll talk about each of these specific modes of action and how they work in upcoming slides. 2% liquid strychnine was by far the most widely used in both Saskatchewan and Alberta. It is no longer registered for use, so its use is now illegal. If you have any stores of it, it's probably no good anyway. It didn't store very well. It does not freeze well at all. So even if you still have access to some bottles of strychnine, A, it's not legal to use, and B, it's probably not going to do the trick anyway. It really loses its punch even after a year. So the Saskatchewan Gopher Control Program, for those who aren't familiar, is funded under the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnership, so that it is jointly funded by the federal government and the provincial government. It is administered by SARM, and it's a rebate program for accepted control practices. So that is up to 50% of registered gopher control products, including the ones that we just discussed. And it also includes non-chemical means. The non-chemical means are capped, but include raptor platforms and nest boxes, pardon me, and these are eligible for 50% rebate to a maximum of 125. These are offered through RMs and First Nations through their offices and to other stakeholders. So just a little discussion about biological control, and this really is biological control meets cultural control. So the cultural control part is making an environment more suitable for, in this case, a biological control agent. So this is American kestrel. It's a small falcon. You'll see these hovering over yards and fields, primarily in the spring, but they can establish in areas as well. They like treed areas, so nest boxes are really great for these animals, and they are generalists. Probably not going to take down an adult Richardson's ground squirrel, but they will happily munch on the young ones, and they are voracious predators. So keep in mind too that all of these predators are generalists, and in the case of kestrel, it also happily munches on songbirds. So if you have an orchard, that could be a great idea for keeping the blackbirds away. However, if you do enjoy the company of songbirds, you may not want to have one of these in residence at your place. Quite a striking little falcon, though. These are what the nesting boxes look like, and there is a crop protection news article with all of these figures in them. And for anyone who's curious, I can share the website for it. But if you look for CPN Raptor box, you'll find these fairly easily online. So without going into too much detail on these, it is a box that kestrels like to use for nesting. You will mount those on a tree. Similarly, the American barn owl can be an important predator of Richardson's ground squirrel, and can be a day active owl as well. It is an infrequent nester in Saskatchewan, but it will nest here. So if you do happen to have barn owls in the area, you can promote them with a nesting box. So it's a much larger box. It's a much larger bird, and there's some tips there for box placement and barn construct and box construction. So once again, I'll share a link to that, or simply do a Google or whichever search engine you prefer. Search for Raptor box, Raptor platform, and you'll come up with it. This one is really common, particularly in southern Saskatchewan. It is a northern harrier. You'll see these birds flying not very high, 3-4 feet above the ground. Quite hilarious to watch, especially when it's windy. They look quite clunky, quite clumsy, but obviously they're pretty good at the whole flying thing. And they really like Richardson's ground squirrel. They will also ground hunt, so that is hop along the ground and chase down prey on the ground as well. But yeah, they can be voracious predators of Richardson's ground squirrel. And this one is actually a specialist of Richardson's ground squirrel. It's most prevalent in the southwest of the province, and their fledglings depend almost entirely on Richardson's ground squirrel. So it really is a specialist. On these, what really gives these ones away is their size. They're massive birds. I mean, eagle-sized hawks, and you know, fairly distinctive face, really, but the coloration really gives it away. Although there are different color morphs. That iron color, that, you know, that's where it gets its name, ferruginous hawk. It looks a little bit like iron rust. There are, however, different color morphs in here. We can see a light color morph at the bottom here. I've been trying to identify what it's munching on here, and I'm not really sure. It almost looks like, if I'm being honest, it looks like a koala, but I think that's pretty unlikely. So raptor nesting platforms, good for harriers, good for ferruginous hawk, Swainson's hawk, red-tailed hawk, sharp-shinned hawk, a number of different large hawk species. So the plans for these, and just to get a quick look at these, this is one that we constructed for a video, and if you take a look on YouTube, you will find this in addition to some instructions on constructing them. And this is an older photo courtesy of SARM of a raptor platform made from a recycled power pole, it looks like. Used 4x4 for mine. It's still standing after experiencing all of these significant wins we've had in a little while, last little while, and that one was built for less than 200 bucks. So they're cheap and easy to make. Getting them in the ground is always a challenge, but there it is. Also important to consider too is that we do have alternatives for strychnine, and we did some testing of these in 2022 and 2023 in collaboration with other specialists in Alberta. So this was a multi-site, multi-year replicated field trial. We looked at strychnine, zinc phosphide products, that is burro oat bait and ZP rodent oat bait, and a couple of the anticoagulants, Rosol RTU and Ramic Green. The products that we looked at were chosen based on ease of use and being readily available. So these are all ready to use formulations. So that is, that again is, open the bag, fire a spoon in there, down the hole she goes, and that's really all you need to do on that one. And so relatively easy to use. You can use bait stations with these as well, which you couldn't with strychnine. And looking at the results, this is from Saskatchewan 2022. The rest of the results were fairly similar to these. You can see the burro oat bait and the ZP rodent oat bait very similar to strychnine in their ability to knock down populations of Richardson's ground squirrel. You'll notice too that that Rosol didn't perform as well, and I think that could be an artifact of a couple of different things. They are multiple feeding products, that is the anticoagulants, Rosol and Ramic Green. We did put down two applications of both of those in both years, but Rosol is not quick to kill. It can take 7 to 10 days to kill, and the population may have been on the decline at that point. But we may not have seen all the mortality associated with it. So we monitored these for a week. So that does kind of fit in with that narrative. However, it will knock down populations. It's a pretty good product. Anticoagulants have a couple of strikes against them, and I'll talk about those in an upcoming slide. Did an economic analysis of these as well, and this is from 2023 based on prices. Everything went up in 2023 relative to 2022, but the zinc phosphide bait still came out as this is at the high rate. Per acre rate, or the per acre cost was lower for the zinc phosphide baits. This is per application for the anticoagulants. So when you're talking about 2 applications, not just the labor associated with just the cost of the bait, you're looking at 40 bucks an acre. Ramic Green, you can put down as many as 3 applications, and that's going to put you up around that 40 bucks an acre level as well. So a consideration for those. I wanted to mention as well, before we talk about rats, some of the considerations for these have to do with residues. So in the case of zinc phosphide, it breaks down into phosphine gas, and we'll talk about that in some detail in a coming slide. So the gas tends to escape the cadaver, and the level of residues tend to be low. So the hazard that it presents to non-targets is relatively low, especially scavengers and predators. In the case of the anticoagulants, because they take so long to kill, the liver in particular can be densely packed with this toxin, and can present a real hazard to non-targets. So, and they do tend to weaken over time and become more susceptible to predation. So with that, we can talk about rats. So these are still regulated under what's now the Plant Health Act. The Pest Control Act has been replaced now by the Plant Health Act, and it is a regulated pest under the new act as well. So it includes a responsibility for controlling and destroying pests. Resides with every person who owns land and buildings, occupies land and buildings, or controls land. Pardon the different font. That's a bit of an oddity. So what we're talking about primarily in Saskatchewan is Rattus norvegicus, or the brown rat or Norway rat. A bit of a misnomer, well, more than a bit of a misnomer. These are most likely from China, not Norway. They arrived in Europe as early as 1553. The credit or the blame for calling it Norway rat resides with John Birkenhout, who authored Outlines of the Natural History of Great Britain, and and coined the term Norway rat. So relatively small ears and eyes on these animals, blunt nose, small feet. The body is thicker and heavier than some other rodent species, particularly mice and black rat, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And the tail is shorter than the head and body. The droppings are relatively conspicuous as well, with a pointed end, or pardon me, with rounded end, and relatively large compared to mouse droppings. And these animals can be large, so total length 18 inches from nose to end of tail. And of course, when things are moving, they always look bigger, and you do get claims of, Labrador-sized rats occasionally. Probably not the case. This is the black rat. It's also regulated in Saskatchewan. These animals are also called roof rats or ship rats. And once again, their origins are from Southeast Asia. They're less common in Canada and by a long shot, really. We don't have an accurate census of species distribution, though. So anecdotally, it is much less common. As you can tell, darker coloration, pointed nose, larger ears and eyes than the brown rat, and the body slimmer. The tail is also longer than the head and body, which is relatively conspicuous of these, and relatively larger feet. They do tend to prefer elevated areas too, and you'll see them on occasion on roofs, trying to gain access to structures, or on power lines. It is, can be a relatively substantial animal, 17 inches, but more slightly built than the brown rat or Norway rat. And the droppings, once again, with the rounded ends there. So some of the problems associated with rats, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, they can be significant consumers of stored products and whatever they happen to come across. They can eat 10% of their body weight every day. They will contaminate the heck out of things. So they're going to be urinating and defecating while they're feeding. They don't seem to have any table manners as far as that goes. So they're really going to make a mess of things. So they can damage and contaminate food, feed, and structures. They are important reservoirs and vectors of disease. So they are responsible for direct and indirect transmission of pathogenic bacteria. And this includes Yersinia pestis, which is in a large part why this is a regulated pest. So Yersinia pestis is the bacterium that's responsible for the Black Death in Europe. It is resident in the prairies. It's called sylvatic plague here, not bubonic plague. It's the same organism. So it can take up residence in rat populations, and fleas, of course, that feed on rats and on ground squirrels. So be aware. It's also rats are also important reservoirs of Toxoplasmosis gondii, and that is the protist pictured above. Think of protists. They're actually classed under the fungi now, or listed under the fungi, and I think of them a little bit as mobile single-celled fungi. So you can see there, thick cell walls and microscopic animals, but definitely responsible for some pretty significant disease and can cause birth defects in children. So that is pregnant mothers who are exposed to this pathogen can develop pretty significant problems. They are also reservoirs and vectors of salmonella, ringworm, and leptospirosis. However, rabies and hantavirus are not associated with rats. Rabies can occur in rodents, including Richardson's ground squirrel, but it has never been documented to transmit to humans in North America ever. So never ever has rabies been transmitted by Richardson's ground squirrel or a rat in North America to a human. So it's theoretically possible for them to harbor rabies, but typically if they're going to get a bite that's substantial enough for them to contract rabies, they're going to die from that wound. So structural damage is also very important with rats. Grain eaters and other food and feed storage, they can cause problems with cold air entry, stress to livestock, increased fuel use, and frost heaving, undermine foundations with tunneling. And here's a pretty decent photo of some rats doing their best to undermine that cement pad, and can cause fires and water issues with their feeding on pipes, wires, and conduits. Pardon me, here's a brief history of the invasion of Western Canada by rats. It's thought that a lot of the movement was along rail lines, and that's really where rat surveying began in Western Canada, particularly in the 1940s, which really was the beginning of a concerted effort to control rats in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta. Pardon me. So you can see, stepwise migration and continuous movement right through the 1950s. So yeah, still consider these to be an invasive, and another big reason that they're regulated. So a little discussion about their life cycles. They can live for 3 years, can live for a little bit longer, but typically about 3 years. They have large hierarchical societies. So yeah, if you're low on the rat totem pole, you can actually be consumed in times of food shortage. Pardon me. So yeah, it pays to be middle or higher. They tend to nest where they find warmth and access to food, water, and materials. Here, a little photo of a nest. I'm sure many of you have experience with seeing nests and burrows. Up to 5 litters of 14 per year. They can alter their reproductive rate. So that is, they can increase the reproductive rate when populations are low as a means to increase their population. They can also delay development of their young up to 2 weeks. So this is unusual for mammals. And there's a species of deer that can do this there, and rats, and really not much else for mammals. It's more common in insects. And the phenomenon is called diapause, and it's an arrested development brought on by resource scarcity in this case. So sexual maturity in about 5 weeks. So that is theoretically a pair can produce 15,000 in a year. However, normally you're looking at upwards of 90% mortality, but even you knock 90% off of that, that's still a pretty substantial increase. So rat control, primary means is with chemical control. Many baits and powders registered. Biological control is almost never successful when it's by itself. So really, in the case of rats, you're looking at local eradication rather than simply suppressing a population, and predators just aren't that effective at doing that. Cultural control includes exclusion, so that is limiting food and water resources, and this is tremendously important. So garbage, compost, fallen fruit, anything else that they could come in contact with and exploit as a resource. Eliminate hiding in living places, and to that, pest-proof buildings. So metal screening and steel mesh, crack repair, and put sheds on concrete slabs, in addition to a number of other techniques. But think about exclusion. If just keeping the rats out can be a really important step towards control of a population. Detection is important. One thing that I don't know is generally appreciated is that a lot of critters see and hear things that we don't see and hear. And in the case of rats, they speak in or chirp in supersonic frequencies. So excellent human hearing extends up to about 20,000 hertz. At finer frequencies or higher frequencies, that's where rat chatter is typically occurring. Cats and dogs can hear that though. So if you do see a cat or a dog paying close attention to a wall, that could be an indication that there's a rat in there. Cats, of course, are also excellent detectors of ghost moths and imaginary friends, and will occasionally fixate on things that don't exist. So, yeah, don't consider that to be a be all and end all, but they can be good early warners of things. So, nesting material, droppings, debris, burrows. You can hear rodents moving within walls, attics, and under foundations. For those of you who've heard rat activity in a wall, it's a disconcerting sound. There's no other way to put that. It's not like, boy, that's a really pleasant sound. So again, you can hear the animals moving. There can be a distinctive musky smell, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this, particularly if they're confined to a small area. Rodent urine has a particular smell. And their oily hair, and you'll see this with mice as well, will leave noticeable smudge marks if they're using an area regularly, and they will use little highways over and over and over again. So from a cultural control perspective, you can also look at traps and glue boards, and there are many designs, and these are typically relatively inexpensive and widely available. So I'm certain all of you are familiar with rat control programs, so I'll just skip over this slide. We'll talk a little bit about the house mouse, which can be a problem, particularly in urban areas. Mus musculus, which is a cosmopolitan critter, or that is in areas where with European affiliation, we'll say. So it is a nuisance pest in Saskatchewan. There is a strong association with human settlements and structures, and consider the methods to detect and control much like that for rats. They're smaller animals, so 6 to 7 inches. They can be mistaken, or their adults can be mistaken for juvenile rats, but look for the large ears, pointed nose, and the small round body, and the relatively small feet compared to rats, especially roof rats. And the tail length is going to be equal to the head and body. Droppings will be proportionately smaller. Deer mice. This is actually not just one species. So we have several species in North America in the genus Peromyscus, pardon me. This is dominated in this region by the white-footed mouse, and that's Peromyscus leucopus, and that's a photo of it right there. It has a real distinctive gerbil look about it. White feet, white belly, big ears, big eyes. So and a relatively furry tail as well. Usually live for about 1 or 2 years. They're omnivores and heavy consumers of insect larvae. Again, they're a native species, very common in Saskatchewan, particularly southern Saskatchewan, and particularly in rural and semi-rural areas. So in addition to some of the issues that you can get with them establishing in structures and causing messes and potentially consuming stored products, is that they are reservoirs for disease. They're also excellent climbers, and they will climb surprising surfaces. So they are reservoirs for Lyme disease. Happily, we don't have what are called extant populations or established populations of this tick. This is Ixodes scapularis, or the deer tick. We do have populations of dog tick. Dog tick is not a vector of Lyme disease. Deer tick, however, is. We do have ephemeral populations of this tick, though, and people are occasionally bitten by them, even in Saskatchewan. So it's good to get your tick ID'd, and that'll give you an indication as to your risk of potentially contracting Lyme disease. So what ticks do, they're considered searchers, and you can see the small one on the end there with 6 legs. That's called a larva. They molt, grow another pair of legs, and that becomes a nymph. And then we have adults here. That's males, and that's a male on the right and a female on the left. So they're blood feeders at all stages, and mice are important hosts for the nymphs and the larvae. And they are the primary host. This is where the tick is going to pick up Lyme disease, and then the reproductive host is going to be deer, which is why they're called deer ticks. Kind of makes sense, yes. However, they will take a blood meal from humans as well as a number of other critters, and this is where their potential for them to pass the infection to a human occurs. Deer mice are also important reservoirs of hantavirus, and that's transmitted through contact with the feces, urine, or saliva. So a little discussion about chemical pest control. Chemical pest control began with an unlikely product. So that is with an artist pigment. This used to be quite a popular pigment. You can see the picture of Vincent van Gogh there, who actually using Paris green. So that bright green coloration in that painting is the mixture of his paint and this Paris green. So it was first used as a pest control product in Paris sewers in the 1800s. So it's an arsenic-based pigment and very toxic to a broad assortment of different living things. Interesting fun fact: Napoleon Bonaparte, when he was well, it would have been his last exile from France when he was deposed again for the last time. Actually, I'm trying to remember the name of the island, Saint Helena, I think, which is right kind of smack dab in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Not a very big place, but when you got an empire, when you got an emperor, and where do you put your emperor? That's where you put your emperor, apparently, when the emperor falls out of favor. So arsenic gas was released from what's called Shelley's green, which is a slightly less toxic form of Paris green, but was used as a tincture or a pigment for fabrics, and in this case, wallpaper. So tropical environment, fungus eats the wallpaper, arsenic gas released, Napoleon dies of cancer associated with the arsenic poisoning. So Crittle's formula, for those who are not familiar with Norman Criddle, he was the officer in charge, Dominion Entomological Laboratory, Treesbank. So that's in Manitoba. And he was responsible for grasshopper monitoring and control in the 1920s and 1930s in Western Canada. So yeah, he had a big backyard to work in. He discovered that a mixture of horse manure and Paris green was a very effective bait for grasshoppers, and this became a real go-to. So it was really heavily used throughout Western Canada for grasshopper control in the midst of a massive grasshopper outbreak in the 1930s, and used well into the United States. So that is into the Dakotas and further parts south. Many regions are still experiencing significant arsenic contamination in their groundwater, and it's associated with the use of this Crittle's formula for grasshopper control. So once you get arsenic in groundwater, it's very difficult to get rid of, virtually impossible. A little discussion about strychnine. It was used for burrowing rodents. It is no longer registered for rodents in Canada. It is a toxic, intensely bitter terpene indole alkaloid, and there is the chemical diagram of the substance. It is a natural product, so a lot of people tend to associate high toxicity with synthetic products. This is what's called a plant defense compound. So this plant defends its seeds with strychnine. So it is called the venom orange, and I think probably for good reason. It is native to South Asia, and it is farmed commercially in India for the production of strychnine. The inhalation, absorption through eyes or mouth or oral consumption are all routes for toxicity. It's a neurotoxin, so it's a high affinity, low specificity antagonist of acetylcholine receptors and glycine. So functionally what this does is it plugs up where that neurotransmitter might fit. So that synapse, or that space between those neurons, is told to fire, and the signal just goes on, because the signal is never degraded. So what that means is that muscles fire spasmodically, and death is by respiratory arrest when those spasms take over in the heart and lungs. So broadly toxic. The next one is zinc phosphide. We've talked a little bit about that in the previous slide. There are products that are registered for rats, mice, and burrowing rodents. And once again, this is our recommended go-to for Richardson's ground squirrel of the registered products right now. It's an old product. I mean, it was first synthesized in 1740. First used as a rodenticide in 1911 in Italy. It's been registered in Canada for use since 1961. It's a stable product, and unless it encounters an acid or very high temperatures, it's going to stay put. Under acidic conditions, though, that is at a pH less than 4, like you might encounter in an animal's gut, it's going to hydrolyze and release phosphine gas, and that's that pH 3. So phosphine gas is really what the bulk of the toxicity of the substance is associated with. And what it does is it blocks cytochrome oxidase. So this is going to inhibit mitochondrial activity, and it's going to cause cell necrosis or cell death in the heart, brain, kidneys, and liver. And it can be very fast acting. And there's also evidence that it can act as a strict neurotoxin by inactivating acetylcholinesterase and resulting in that fire response from those neurons. There can be residual effects associated with zinc phosphide as well because it can be absorbed, resulting in delayed hepatic and renal function, renal failure. So that is liver and kidney failure. However, the primary mode of action is the release of this phosphine gas and the cell necrosis associated with it, resulting in massive organ failure. And once again, the gas tends to escape the cadaver and present a reduced risk to non-target animals. Aluminum phosphide is a very closely related substance, but it is much less stable. It is primarily used as a fumigant and primarily for stirred products insects. So products like Weevil-cide or Phostoxin here, these are used primarily to fumigate bins. This hydrolyzes like zinc phosphide to release phosphine gas, but it'll do it under neutral conditions. It is highly reactive. It will react strongly with soil moisture. It will even react with atmospheric moisture. So it is a very unstable substance. It is a restricted use product, so you need a detailed fumigation management plan that needs to be written prior to treatment. The facilities that use this product, all employees must complete mandatory training annually on the hazards of this product and safe use, including respiratory protection, personal monitors, and be aware of the exposure limit of 0.1 parts per million. It is the responsibility of the applicator, and the applicator, it is a regulated, a restricted use product, so you need special licensure to apply this, to inform the person in charge of a facility or agricultural establishment where the fumigation will take place. And of the requirement for mandatory training. This stuff really is very dangerous, and there have been a number of cases in recent years of people accidentally poisoning their family, trying to get bedbug control in an apartment block, or just mistakenly using it improperly and causing severe problems. It's been registered in Canada since 1978. So it's a potent product, but holy heck, yeah, it's really quite a dangerous substance. Bromethylene is another one. This one is used for rats and mice. Was discovered in the 1980s, and the Canadian registration was in 1996. It is a neurotoxin. So it is also associated with mitochondrial function. So it's going to uncouple mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation. This is going to decrease ATP synthesis. So ATP, of course, is the energy of cell metabolism. This is going to inhibit your sodium potassium ATPase enzyme, leading to a buildup of cerebral spinal fluid. So this is really what's going to kill the critter. Increased intracranial pressure, permanent damage to neuronal axons. So that is brain damage. So this is going to result in paralysis, convulsions, and death. So yeah, a registered product for rats and mice. Anticoagulants are also very important for the control of rats and mice. And historically, warfarin is still used for the control of rats and mice, but resistance has been demonstrated in a number of populations, primarily of rats. So the history of this one in the 1920s, Schofield in Ontario and Roderick in North Dakota traced cattle sickness and mortality to wet spoiled clover. Uh, One of the people working in the Ontario lab discovered that 4-hydroxycoumarin was the substance that was responsible for these anticoagulant effects, and this was determined to be produced from the reaction of coumarin, which is another host plant defense substance that's present in legumes, and a fungi that was infecting these wet plants, or this wet spoiled clover. So this reaction of the fungi and a natural defense mechanism from the plant produced this 4-hydroxycoumarin, which was isolated and produced commercially as rat poison in 1948. First registered in Canada is 1951. And the mode of action of this and the mode of action of all the anticoagulants that we're going to talk to with different structural forms is the inhibition of vitamin K. And primarily associated with the recycling of vitamin K. Vitamin K is an essential component of blood clotting. And in this case, it's targeting vitamin K epoxide reductase complex, subunit 1. So yeah, that'll be on the quiz, I think. So yeah, just be aware. The take-home message: it's going to be vitamin K recycling. That's going to be strongly influenced. So it also increases the permeability of blood capillaries. So you get this reduced clotting ability and leaky capillaries. And so internal bleeding is the primary reason that these animals die. So other first generations that were developed after the discovery of warfarin include chlorofascinone, and these first generations are registered for rats, mice, and for burrowing rodents. We did talk about Rosol and Lifotech in 1961, which I think used to be called Lipa, discovered chlorofascinone in 1961, branded it Rosol. So that is still the same substance that's used today. So registered in Canada in 1972, and you can see the structural similarity between chlorofascinone and difascinone. I mean, really indistinguishable with the exception, take a look at that top right there. You can see that chlorine, the chlorine stuck to that R group. That's really the only difference between this. Other than that, they're very similar substances. So difascinone was first described in 1952, registered in Canada in 1968. Their mode of action is very similar to that of warfarin. However, it's derived from a different source. So instead of 4-hydroxycoumarin, these ones are derived from indandione. So it is a slightly different molecule. The synthesis process is different, but you wind up with very similar molecules at the end of things and a very similar result. So once again, preventing regeneration of vitamin K1. So in the case of these ones, multiple feedings are required and they can take a long time to kill. So 7 to 10 days in some cases. So enter second generation anticoagulants. These are used for rats and mice, full stop. There are no registered use for burrowing rodents. Once again, vitamin K antagonist. Similar mode of action to warfarin, similar mode of action to chlorofascinone, difascinone. These are considered super warfarins. So they are very high, or that's the name that was coined for them, very high potency and very long duration of action. So this very long duration can have implications for non-target activity. So that is, it can stick around in a cadaver for a relatively long time, cause a real problem for scavengers and predators. And because of this, the province of British Columbia is taking, or has taken, a look at second generation anticoagulants and issued some more restrictive guidance associated with the use of these products. We'll talk about all of these products in the very last slide as well, because we're going to have some challenges coming up. So there are concerns, as I mentioned, about residues and secondary poisoning. So amongst the second generation anticoagulants, there's a couple of I don't want to say older products, but so we got bromadiolone, which is a 4-hydroxycoumarin derivative, of course, 4-hydroxycoumarin is warfarin, the Canadian registration in 1978, and brodifacoum as well, another 4-hydroxycoumarin derivative. So that is another warfarin derivative. This one is extremely toxic to fish, and again, the late 70s for registration date. So you can see the bromine group on there. Yeah, on all of these molecules, one thing they all share, all have in common. Diphthiolone is also a second generation anticoagulant, and rather than being derived from 4-hydroxycoumarin, it's derived from benzopyranidone, which is a very similar molecule to 4-hydroxycoumarin, but it's a slightly different synthesis process and of course a different derivative. So relatively recent registration of this one in the year 2000. All of these are potent second generation anticoagulants, and the same note of caution about secondary poisonings and residues should be exercised with all of these. But most of your rat products are going to be in this group. Finally, Rocon. This is a mixture of, as I mentioned before, white mustard seed powder from Brassica hirta and a soap. So basically, this is the same soap that you're going to see in shampoo. This mixture of white mustard seed powder and foam and soap is going to be pumped as a foam into burrowing rodent and rat burrows. So it's registered for rats, it's registered for Richardson's ground squirrel. It is primarily a suffocant, but it is also a significant irritant. So you use some pretty serious caution with this one because it will cause irreversible eye damage. I mean, if humane dispatching of critters is of mind, you might want to consider that as well, because I'm trying to think of a less pleasant way to pass, and I can't come up with it. So we'll talk a little bit about that. What it uses for toxicity is what's called the mustard oil bomb. So anybody ever had wasabi or horseradish, you've experienced the mustard oil bomb. So imagine that multiplied by 100 and at doses large enough to kill, and you're inhaling it and getting it in your eyes. Not a very pleasant experience. So the bomb is associated with a substance called or substances called glucosinolates. And one of the major glucosinolates is a substance called synegrin. You can see on this molecule on the left there, with the ho 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 o, is what's called a sugar moiety. And on the right is you've got your aglycone moiety. And what this enzyme does, called myrosinase, that's present in the plant, is when these are mixed together, it's going to cleave that sugar moiety from the aglycone moiety. And the aglycone moiety is really the thing that packs the punch. So under different conditions, under different pH conditions, it's going to change its conformation. So that molecule is going to spin around and rearrange itself to look a certain way under specific conditions, really strongly influenced by pH. But the major product with this glycolysis or this enzyme myrosinase derived glycolysis of synegrin is allyl isothiocyanate, or sometimes simply called mustard oil. So this allyl isothiocyanate is really what gives the zap to wasabi and horseradish, and it's volatile. That is, it's airborne. And very, very potent. As a summer student, I spilled purified allyl isothiocyanate on myself out in the field, and holy Dinah, I've never felt anything like that. It really felt like being on fire, having never been on fire, but you take my point. Yeah, the LD50, or that is the lethal dose, or the dose required to kill 50% of a rat population of allyl isothiocyanate, is comparable to that of chlorpyrifos. So that is an insecticide that used to be sold as a product called Lorsban. So with high mammalian toxicity, or what's considered high mammalian toxicity. So it is quite toxic, despite the fact that it is marketed as a non-poison, it is still quite toxic. So exercise some caution. Strychnine, however, yeah, strychnine still rules the day as far as toxicity. So it doesn't take very much strychnine to kill a whole lot of rats. So I did mention some coming challenges in the next little while, particularly in next year. So what's slated for Q2 of 2026 is a cyclical review of the rodenticide cluster. So PMRA is going to be reviewing, they're obliged to review registered products every 15 years and incorporate new science, new findings, and incidents associated with all registered pest control products. And all of these rodenticides are registered as pest control products. So all of the first generation anticoagulants, including warfarin, chlorophacinone, difacinone, second generation anticoagulants, which are very important for rat control. So the brodifacoum, bromadiolone, and diphenthioalone, and those with mitochondrial activity, including zinc phosphide and bromothalen, pardon me. So yeah, we're going to have some challenges with that. We're hoping that this will be a relatively painless process. Cyclical reviews can be, but yeah, don't count on it. I think there might be a few bumps in the road on this one, and access to some products may be limited in the future. And with that, I'll address any questions.
Thank you, James. That was a great presentation. So I will check for any questions we have.
Oh, sorry, I've gone a little over time. I apologize.
Oh, no worries. Um,
I
I
get I get going. It's hard to stop, you know. So
it was great presentation, so very informative.
I'm
Um,
glad you enjoyed.
I have one question received so far. What practices would you recommend for people who do not want to place bait or who want to do non-baiting prevention?
Of which animal?
For rat, I guess they didn't mention.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, I think exclusion is fundamental. Yeah, so I mean, clean up the yard, clean up the vegetation around buildings. Um, it's probably good, to have local knowledge, find out if there are resident rat populations in the region, or any reports of those. Determine if you have anything to worry about. But yeah, sanitation is really important for keeping the rats out.
Okay. So is Liquid Talks still available? Um,
Not to my knowledge. What was the active in that one?
Sorry, it's just mention Liquid Talks in there.
Liquitox, eh? Uh, if you guys don't mind, I'll take a look at the PMRA database and I'll tell you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, talk amongst yourselves. Smoke them
And
if you got them.
someone mentioned they just ordered some from from one of the company there, GWB. So I'm not sure which one. That, on average, do you um, sorry, can I go for the next question or?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just give me a quick moment here. I'm
Oh,
not seeing a registration for Liquitox. Apologize.
James, can you try Liquitox 2? This is
Okay,
Colleen. And it's spelled Liqua with an
yeah,
A, not an
gotcha.
I.
Oh no, I got it here. Yep. Liquitox rodenticide is registered. I'm just looking for the active here. Yeah, it's difascinone. Yeah, so it's the same active ingredients as Ramic. So yeah, the same considerations as Ramic and the same issues, the same potential issues with it. It will be relatively slower to kill than some other products. I apologize, my mouse is not acting very well. Trying to get to the top of the label here. So yeah, so register. This one's just registered for rats and mice. It'll kill them.
Okay, thanks. The next question is, pest control officers inspect all yards, acreages, farms, vineyards, or do they just inspect farms and vineyards?
They have the right to access any non-residential structure. So I think if there's indication of a problem, then that capacity exists.
Yeah, thank you.
Residential structures are another story though. So
So in your opinion, spring or fall, when is the best time for inspection or controlling rats?
yeah, given that they're active all year. So yeah, I wouldn't favor one or the other.
Okay. So far, I didn't see any other questions. And yeah, I think thanks so much, James, and thank you for answering the questions and all the presentations. So I will, and I didn't see any more questions, so I think we can wind up.
Okay.
So just for information for the attendees, the past recorded webinars will be available on some website. Please reach out to your rat control technical advisors, Grant and Colette, for technical questions. And for all other questions, please reach out to your plant health technical advisor. And thanks again, everyone, for attending today, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Thanks all.
Thank you, James. Bye.